are studying dependent arising as it was explained in the Entry to the State of a Pandita, a text composed by Mipham Rinpoche. We went over the summarized presentation of the subject, and now we're focusing on the detailed explanation. In the detailed explanation, we looked at outer dependent arising, and we are now focusing on interdependent arising. In this section, we're looking at the causal links, the 12 components of interdependent arising. We looked at the summarized presentation, and this year we began the detailed explanation of these 12 components. Yesterday, we went over the first 9 links: ignorance, conditioning phenomena, consciousness, name and form, the 6 inner ayatanas, contact, sensation, craving, and grasping. Today we will continue with becoming. Before beginning becoming, we'll just read a short note about grasping, the previous component, which becoming stems from or follows on from. Concerning grasping, the text said, on the basis of craving, desirous craving greatly increases. May I not be separated from what is pleasant and agreeable. Adopting the object and truly connecting to it. This is the component of grasping. It's also said that this can be divided into 4 types of craving: that of desirable objects, that of the view, that of ethic or asceticism grasped as supreme, and that of the affirmation of the existence of a self. And now we come to the following component, the 10th, becoming. In the text it says, due to grasping, actions of body, speech, and mind that establish the following existence become manifest. This is the component called becoming. There is notably division into 3 types of becoming. Becoming connected with each of the 3 realms. We saw that there are 4 types of grasping: that of desirable objects, that of the view, that of ethics and asceticism grasped as supreme, and that of affirmation of the existence of a self. What is the effect of these 4 types of grasping? The effect is different actions of body, speech, and mind that will establish the following existence, subsequent existence. This is the component becoming. What does becoming mean? This is the translation of the Tibetan term sipa, which can also be translated by existence. In general, when we talk about becoming or existence, we're talking about the different types of existence in an impure world, in a samsara. There are 4 types of becoming or existence. There is the becoming or existence before death, in other words, during one's lifetime. There is also becoming or existence at the moment of death. There is intermediate becoming between death and a new life, also known as the bardo, the becoming of the bardo. And the 4th is becoming or existence of birth. Here, in the context of this component of dependent arising, existence refers to the existence or becoming of the bardo, intermediate becoming between death and life. Here, the text mentions 3 types of becoming. These 3 types of becoming refer to the becoming or intermediate existence for each of the 3 realms: the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. This concerns a mind which, having left the body, finds itself in this intermediate existence between death and a new birth. This type of existence between death and a new rebirth is present in the desire realm or for the desire realm and the form realm. Concerning the formless realm, the views of past masters diverge, but most of them agree that there isn't one. There is no intermediate existence between death and a new life when one is going toward the formless realm. So then why is becoming of the formless realm included here? It can be said that there is an intermediate becoming, but it is extremely brief. This intermediate becoming corresponds to the amount of time between 2 moments. The final moment of a mind of the desire realm, for example, and the first moment of a mind of the formless realm. All good? To say it another way, when a being of the desire realm dies, they can be reborn either in the desire realm, the form realm, or the formless realm. If they're reborn in the desire realm, there's definitely an intermediate becoming. Between death and a new life, there will be an existence that will last for more or less time, but will last for a certain amount of time. If this being from the desire realm is next born into the form realm, then there will again be an existence that will last for a certain time between the two. However, if they will be reborn in the formless realm, it's almost instantaneous. There's just the lapse of time found between two moments. So there's not really a becoming that lasts for a given amount of time. It's extremely brief. Is that clear? There's a question. I'm a little lost. I understood 9, grasping. And then depending on this grasping, we're reborn in different realms. According to this grasping, this is the consequence of grasping. There's not a lot of detail here. We'll see a little bit later. This component, becoming, is classified among actions. Following grasping, there are actions that are accumulated, and these actions essentially concern this existence between death and a new birth. In other words, actions that are mainly accumulated during this period between death and a new rebirth, and which will condition the next birth. There's more detail later on. Now we come to the next link, the next component, birth. The root text reads, when, due to the power of becoming, the conditions come together, conception within a support for birth in a new existence, the complete development of the body, and abiding in a same class of sentient being make up the component birth. It is the basis of experiencing suffering linked to this support, as many as they may be. So here a being is found, a mind is found between death and a new birth, and parents are connected in sexual union, and when consciousness enters the womb, this is the beginning of the component birth. Thus, this sentence, conception within a support for birth in a new existence. Birth begins at the moment of conception, when the parents engage in sexual relations and the consciousness enters the mother's womb. Then there is the process of development of the fetus in the womb, and at the end, the baby comes out of the mother's belly, and this is birth as we generally understand it. These 3 steps make up the component birth as it is defined here. So here birth is not simply as we understand it habitually, which only concerns when the baby comes out of the mother's belly. It involves these 3 steps: conception, the development of the fetus in the womb, and lastly, the baby coming out of its mother's belly. All of this is birth. In order for this birth to occur, the conditions must come together, as it says in the root text. These conditions firstly include consciousness, which is in the intermediate becoming and which is seeking. It's wandering without reference points, full of anguish, and looking to go out of this state. It's looking for a place to be reborn. It will also look for parents in sexual union with whom it has conformity or parallel in terms of action, karmic conformity. A second condition is that in order for birth to occur, the parents' gametes must not be defective. The third condition is that consciousness must be capable of entering the womb. In order for consciousness to enter the womb, there must not be obstacles. Sometimes, even if there is karmic conformity and non-defectuous gametes, there can be an obstacle to fertilization, notably due to contraception. Furthermore, for consciousness to enter the womb, there must also be mistaken distinction or confused distinction. What is this mistaken or confused distinction? At the moment of the sexual act, jealousy arises toward the parents. If a boy will be born, then he will feel attachment toward the mother and aversion for the father. If a girl will be born, she will feel attachment for her father and aversion toward her mother. In terms of consciousness in the intermediate becoming, it holds the habitual tendencies of attachment, aversion, etc. in the context of the desire realm. In general, girls are attracted to boys and vice versa. That concerns the component of birth. Now we come to the 12th component, that of aging and death. The root text says, based on birth, aging appears. In other words, a change in the continuity of the aggregates. Death, the cessation of this continuity, continuum, which also imply anguish, inner torment, complaint, speech incited by this anguish, physical discomfort linked with the consciousness of the five doors, mental discomfort linked with mental consciousness, and additionally, disturbances, the manifestation of secondary afflictive obscurations experienced as unpleasant. In short, on the basis of birth and samsara, this immense aggregate of pure unhappiness manifests. Based on birth, in other words, once the child comes out of the mother's belly, there is a process of aging which begins. In other words, the changing of the continuum of aggregates. This process concludes at the moment of death, which is none other than the cessation of this continuum of aggregates. Based on this constant change, that is aging, mind experiences both joy and pain, inner torment. Once present, these undesirable torments intensify and bring about complaint or dolence. In other words, the words that this pain brings about. These complaints are then also the origin of physical and mental discomfort. As the root text says, unhappiness linked with the consciousnesses of the five doors and unhappiness linked with mental consciousness. The intensification of these two types of unhappiness bring about afflictive obscurations which increase the mind's agitation. Once afflictive obscurations are born, suffering is necessarily encountered. In short, samsara is a cycle of constant suffering, an immense aggregate of pure unhappiness which appears based on birth, as the text states. Okay, another question. Thank you. Can you please remind us what the consciousnesses of the 5 doors are? Yes, indeed, that's the 5 sense consciousnesses. Now that we have looked at the 12 causal links in detail, the root text continues. This birth also appears based on becoming and so forth. Thus appears the designation. It is because the preceding component existed that the following exists. Because the preceding ones arose, thus the following ones arise. If the preceding component does not exist, or has not arisen, the following one will not appear or arise. In this way, the aggregate of unhappiness ceases. Therefore, birth occurs because consciousness is found in intermediate becoming between birth and a subsequent, between death and subsequent rebirth. Each of the 12 links is caused by the previous one. As the root text says, because the previous component existed, the following one exists. This cycle continues so long as it is uninterrupted. In contrast, as the root text says, if the preceding component does not exist or is not born, the subsequent one is not born or does not appear. Thus, if we cause ignorance to cease, the conditioning phenomena will not arise. The cycle is thus broken, and as the root text says, the aggregate of unhappiness then ceases. Samsara and the suffering that characterizes it cease. Khenpo explains that in order to cause ignorance to cease, it is necessary to reveal primordial wisdom that knows the true nature of phenomena. As a reminder, we progress along the path of accumulation by accomplishing virtue. Just a personal remark here, which also includes the aspect of study and acquiring a correct point of view. In any case, we progress along the path of accumulation by accomplishing virtue, and then starting from the path of junction, we progress by cultivating knowledge of the true nature of phenomena. Khenpo says, acquiring an appropriate point of view concerning the nature of reality is thus important. This concludes the explanation of the causal links in this process of interdependent arising, where each preceding component acts as a causal link for the following one. Next, we come to the following point, which concerns the links, the conditioning links. There are not only causal links, but there are also conditions. The root text says, the next subject is that of conditioning links. The afflictive obscurations, ignorance, etc., also arise based on the meeting of the object of focus, the inner faculty, etc. The same is true for actions. So now we'll look at conditioning links that will accompany causal links. In order to make this easier to understand, we'll start by organizing the 12 components into 3 groups. First comes the group of afflictive obscurations. This group contains ignorance, craving, and grasping. Here, Khenpo Chödrak Rinpoche explains, to begin, how to understand this term, afflictive obscuration, Nyunmo in Tibetan. He says, this is what is endowed with a troubled or agitated aspect. He says, when ignorance is present, this is the beginning of agitation. From the moment that I consider the 5 aggregates as being me, this is the beginning of all our problems. When the view of a self is present, what manifests? Attachment and craving. When craving gets stronger, then we will adopt the object. This is the link of grasping which appears. Thus, agitation is stronger and stronger. It's not necessarily easy to feel agitation because it's fairly subtle. Connected with craving, for example, we might ask ourselves, why do we say that craving agitates? In order to illustrate this, Khenpo gave an example. He talked about himself by saying, I would like to eat a slice of apple. This is an example of craving. Next, his craving intensifies to the point where he does not want to be separated from the slice of apple. And thus, he picks up the plate of apple slices with his hand in order to eat a slice. This illustrates grasping. Then, by accident, Kiki, his translator, makes a movement and bumps the plate and it falls on the ground. Then Khenpo Rinpoche gets angry because he can't eat his apple anymore. So we can see that the craving for eating a slice of apple is therefore a type of agitation or trouble. Of course, it's not very intense, but it is indeed the case, because if it weren't the case, then this greater agitation of anger would not occur when it's no longer possible to eat the apple. Thus, simply because there is agitation to begin with, more intense agitation can occur. So these three links, ignorance, craving, and grasping, are afflictive obscurations. That's the first group. Now we come to the second group, actions. In this second group, actions, we find conditioning phenomena and becoming. Once again, Khenpo gave an example. To illustrate the link of conditioning phenomena, he said, we're all sitting, studying, we're all doing something right now. This is an action. And then to illustrate the link of becoming, he said, in the state between death and rebirth, consciousness wanders, looking for something. It wants to exit this state and find a new birth. And this, once again, is an action. These two, conditioning phenomena and becoming, are actions. That was the second group. Now we come to the third group, the last group, which is that of bases for suffering. And this concerns the 7 remaining components, which are characterized by unhappiness. In other words, based on these, suffering is experienced. So we've done the 3 groups, and after having made these 3 groups, we'll talk about conditioning links. The condition that accompanies afflictive obscurations and actions, the first 2 groups, are first, the condition of focal point, in other words, the object, which can be one of the 6 objects, the 5 sense objects and the mental object. The second condition is the governing condition. This refers to the faculty, one of the 6 faculties. And the immediate condition is also necessary, the mental faculty, which is responsible for each moment of consciousness producing the next one in an endless progression. Helped or supported by these 3 conditions, the object, the faculty, and the preceding condition, afflictive obscurations and actions appear and establish the third group, basis for suffering. That concerns the first 2 groups. Now the text will continue with the conditioning links for the third group, the basis for suffering. The root text says, the basis for suffering or foundations for unhappiness, name and form, etc., arise with the meeting of the 6 dhatus, which act as simultaneous conditions. The dhatu of inner earth, in other words, solidity, the dhatu of inner earth, inner water, humidity, the dhatu of inner fire, whose heat allows for the digestion of food, etc., the dhatu of inner wind, breath, etc., the dhatu of inner space, the internal cavities that include spaces, which are openness, and the dhatu of consciousness. Before going into the explanations of the conditioning links for this basis for suffering, Khenpo first wanted to illustrate the link between suffering and the 7 bases for suffering. He gave the example of a headache. In order for a headache to occur, consciousness must be present, component number 3. In order for a headache to manifest for a human being, it's necessary to have the basis of a human consciousness. Human consciousness is what experiences the type of suffering that we call a headache. What is the basis that allows for human consciousness to experience this headache? The 5 aggregates. Component number 4, name and form. Next come the 6 inner ayatanas, the 5 sense faculties and mental faculty. These 6 faculties will act as a basis which allows for perception to arise and to function. In this example of a headache, based on body faculty, a headache is experienced. Then, on the basis of contact arising from the meeting of object faculty and knowledge, a headache is experienced. Then, concerning component number 7, sensation, this concerns the sensation of a physical unpleasantness arising from contact. This headache can be experienced due to birth as a human. If there were no birth, there would be no headache. And then the 12th component, aging and death, which is also a basis for a headache. Why can a headache appear? It can appear due to aging. This constant process of aging creates imbalance in the body. which leads to different types of suffering, such as headaches. Due to this, or using this example of a headache, khenpo shows how these 7 bases for suffering, in other words, consciousness, name and form, the inner ayatanas, contact, sensation, birth, and aging and death, are conditioning links for this headache. What? No, that's not it. They're not conditioning links. No. Are connected to suffering. The 7 bases for suffering then lead to suffering. And so now we go on to conditioning links. What are the conditioning links? The 6 dhatus that act as simultaneous conditions. What is a dhatu? As it was explained in chapter 2, in the first part of the entry to the state of a Pandita, concerning the 18 dhatus. The term dhatu is a Sanskrit word which means cause, potential, or seed. It's a phenomenon that has the capacity or potential to produce a certain effect. Here, what is at hand are 6 dhatus that act as a simultaneous condition for the appearance of the 7 bases for suffering. What are these 6 conditions that contribute to the appearance of the 7 bases for suffering? First, the 4 basic elements of matter: earth, water, fire, and wind, the elementary forces that make up the body. Then there is the dhatu of space. The dhatu of space concerns inner cavities, which are openings in the body. They allow for all things to function. Without space, there can be no movement. This more particularly here concerns the space found in the inner cavities of the body. The 6th is the dhatu of consciousness. This concerns the consciousness of an individual, whether it is a human, an animal, or something else. The dhatu of consciousness is a condition that allows a being to live for a certain length of time. Without this consciousness, a being cannot live. The body would disintegrate and rot. Consciousness prevents our body from rotting. From the moment that the consciousness of a human or animal leaves the body, then the physical body dies and begins to decompose. After a few hours, the body will start to smell due to decomposition. The body doesn't decompose directly following death. This occurs a few hours after death because there is a prana called prana which is spread everywhere within the body, and this continues to function for a few hours after the body after the mind has left the body. Prana is a Sanskrit word which designates wind circulating in the body. This is also known as lung in Tibetan. In the case of an accomplished meditator, the body won't decompose several hours after death, as it does in the case of an ordinary being. It can be much longer after, because at the moment of death, a meditator will enter meditative absorption, will enter an even state, and the body abides in meditation posture for several days following death. Due to the meditative accomplishment, the process of the body's decomposition will not occur as quickly as in the case of an individual, an ordinary being. These 6 dhatus, which were just explained, are the conditions that contribute to the emergence of these 7 dependent arisings based on which suffering is experienced. What does the term inner mean as it is applied to the first 5 dhatus? We talked about the inner dhatus, inner earth, etc. What is the meaning of this adjective, inner, here, and which is applied to the first 5 dhatus? Here, inner means belonging to personal continuum. In other words, what is me? What is mine? What is me is the aggregate of consciousness, the continuum of mind that we identify with. What is mine concerns the 4 other aggregates of the individual that we consider to be ours. The aggregate of sensations, distinctions, conditioning phenomena, and form. This adjective, inner, means that which belongs to the the personal continuum or personal continuity. It is made up of the aggregate of consciousness, what's me, and the 4 other aggregates, what's mine. We consider the aggregate of consciousness to be me, whereas the other aggregates, for example, my body, I consider them to be mine, my body, my sensations. Here, the first 5 dhatus, earth, water, fire, wind, and space, are said to be inner because they are the elements of my body which I consider to be what's mine. They are not said to be inner if they're not linked to consciousness which considers them to be what's mine. For example, the 5 dhatus that make up this clock, because there is no consciousness that considers them to be its own, what's mine. Yeah. The travel clock doesn't have a consciousness which considers the dhatus to be mine. Thus, they are not qualified as inner. In short, without a great number of causes and conditions coming together, nothing could occur. Everything that occurs is simply a collection of causes and conditions. There is no truly present phenomenon. There's just a collection of causes and conditions which, when they come together and interact, produce something. That's all there is in our reality. Only dependent arising. Which arises based on the coming together of causes and conditions. All good? Now we'll talk about another category, which involves conditions. The root text says, I consciousness arises from the meeting of 5 conditions acting simultaneously. The support, I faculty. The object of focus, a visible form. The visibility of the appearance of the object. Unobstructed space. And intention, or another translation can be attention. The same is true for the other consciousnesses. Here there is an example. This is an example to illustrate, once again, what dependent arising is. The example here is that of I consciousness that arises with the coming together of 5 conditions. As the text says, it's necessary to know that the same is true for the other consciousnesses. Auditory consciousness, olfactory consciousness, gustatory, and body or tactile consciousness. For visual consciousness to occur, it is necessary to have the support, I faculty. Without this visual faculty, a perception, in other words, a visual consciousness, could not occur. That's the first condition. The object of focus is also necessary, a visible form. Without a visual object recorded by I faculty, there would be no visual consciousness of the object. Third, the appearance of the object must be visible. In other words, the object must be manifest. And it needs to not be in the dark, for example. Fourth, the root text speaks of unobstructed space. There must be an unobstructed space between the faculty and the object. There needs to not be a wall, for example, which prevents the object's visibility. And then the fifth condition is intention, which was also sometimes translated as attention. In any case, this refers to the previous moment of consciousness. There needs to have been a previous moment of mind stream, which is animate and knowing, for a moment of visual consciousness to appear. In the commentary by Khenpo Nuden, it's said that this concerns the intention of looking. In the mind, there needs to be this intention of looking for a moment of visual consciousness to emerge. Which is why this condition was translated as intention here. The other translation of this term is attention, because it's the general translation of the Tibetan term yiche, which you may be familiar with concerning Ila Chepa, which is among the 5 omnipresent mental events. But in terms of the commentary from Khenpo Nuden, the translation intention makes sense here. For a moment of visual consciousness to occur, all 5 of these conditions need to come together. Otherwise, there will be no visual consciousness. If the conditions are present, then perception necessarily occurs. For example, I'm in front of you and I see you. Given that, so long as the conditions have come together, remain together, I cannot prevent seeing you. I have to see you, whether I like it or not. On the other hand, if the causes and conditions are not present, even if I want to see you, I can't, because the causes and conditions which allow for visual consciousness to appear have not come together. This concludes the explanations of the conditioning links. Now we come to a new point. The next main point, which is the explanation of the meaning of dependent arising common to these two. It begins with a first subpoint, which is called the explanation of the common or shared meaning of inner and outer dependent arising. This begins with a primary explanation. The root text says, as such, outer and inner phenomena do not arise if a single one among this group of causes and conditions necessary for each phenomenon is not present. If all are present, it is certain that they will arise. Such is the principle of dependent arising. Phenomena appear solely when the different causes and conditions have come together. As an individual, me, I cannot control this process, and no one else can. The root text continues. Since beginningless time, there has never been an agent such as the self, an all-powerful creator, or anything else in this series of continuities. This refers to samsara, by the way. The causes do not think. I produce my own effect. The effects do not think. I am produced by this. Since beginningless time, this applies to all phenomena. Thus, the idea of a supreme self, which is the origin of the universe and beings, is mistaken. There is also no creator God capable of manipulating the universe and its inhabitants. So what is samsara? This series of continuities. It is a tripod. There are 3 legs. Each supports the other 2. One leg represents afflictive obscurations. The next, actions, which occur due to afflictive obscurations. And the third leg is suffering. Khenpo says the primary leg is that of the afflictive obscurations. The most fundamental afflictive obscuration is the idea of a self, the belief in the existence of the individual. So long as this afflictive obscuration is present, samsara continues. The only way to cause this to cease is by realizing the non-existence of self, the emptiness of the individual. We are the only ones who can eradicate it. No one can do it for us. The Buddha said that sentient beings in samsara are like silkworms. A silkworm produces a silk thread and makes a cocoon, and this cocoon imprisons it. This is what we have done based on the idea of a self. The 12 types of dependent arising, or the 12 aspects, components of dependent arising, occur and imprison us. To free ourselves, so that we can free ourselves, the Buddha laid out numerous methods to help us. For example, we can make offerings to the 3 jewels, the 3 rare and supreme. We can pay homage to them. We can recite the texts. In other words, we can engage in beneficial actions which will weaken some habitual samsaric tendencies which are present in our mind stream. When we engage in these actions, it is important to develop a particular state of mind. First, we calm our mind so that it is less agitated. Indeed, without having reached a certain level of calm, it isn't possible to cultivate and realize the absence of essence of self. With this goal of realizing emptiness, we cultivate a state of calm. Next, Khenpo explains the part of the root text which says, "The causes do not think I produce my own effect. The effects do not think I am produced by this." The 3 dependent arisings of the first group, ignorance, craving, and grasping, do not think. Altogether, we should produce such an effect. There's no intention to produce this or that on the part of these 3. When the 3 come together, something is produced without any intention of production. The same thing applies to a seed and its growth into a seedling. The seed never thinks, "I'm going to make a seedling." When the seed is planted in fertile soil and we water it, it simply appears. The seed germinates. Ignorance never thinks, "I'm going to produce actions." This simply appears. Once ignorance is present, actions appear. Furthermore, the action that appears on the basis of ignorance never thinks, "Ignorance made me." All phenomena are like this. They are simply dependent arising. In other words, they will not occur in the absence of their causes and conditions. This is why they have no true reality. Shakyamuni Buddha is the only one in the history of humanity who was capable of understanding this and teaching it. This teaching on dependent arising is the heart of Shakyamuni Buddha's teaching. Therefore, it is important to reflect on it. we'll conclude here today. We have a few minutes if you have questions. Could you clarify something for me? There's a bit of a sentence that I didn't quite follow in paragraph 11 on birth, concerning the component of birth, when it is said that conception within a support for birth in a new existence, complete development of the body, and remaining in a particular class of sentient beings constitute the component called birth. What does this part about remaining in a particular class of sentient beings mean? I didn't quite get that. So remaining within a particular class of sentient beings, well, if you're born as a human being, you stay a human being. There are different classes of sentient beings, animals, human beings, also gods, hungry ghosts, different classes of beings. And once we are born within a class of beings, we remain within this class of beings. Thank you for the presentation. Do you know how long consciousness stays in the becoming of the bardo? Khenpo didn't go into it here, but what we can say in general is that there's no fixed time period. It can occur quickly or it can occur much later. Often the duration of 49 days is cited. It can be that, but it can also be less or more. It's not the main subject here, and I'm not an expert either. Can you clarify the example about visual consciousness a little bit? There are 5 conditions. One of them is intention. You gave an example about being in front of us, and you said, I see you whether I want to or not. But if you don't want to see us, then what's intention? How does intention play into that? You could lower your eyes and not see us. So I don't understand the connection between the 5 conditions and the example which says whether I want to or not. The meaning is simply that it doesn't depend on me. If all of the causes and conditions are gathered, there is a moment of visual consciousness. That's the meaning. And if the conditions are not present, there won't be a moment of consciousness. So then what's the condition of intention? That's what I didn't understand. Yes, it can be confusing. It's true. In fact, it is the moment that precedes the moment of visual consciousness. It's not... Even in this instant, there is no me. It's just a mental event. When we look at the aggregates, This is part of the conditioning phenomena. It's a mental event. There is no me. In this case, here, this is part of the conditions for there to be a subsequent moment of consciousness, and which is directed toward being visual consciousness. I had a question about the component of birth. As human beings, between conception and the moment when a baby comes out of its mother's womb, there are many months. We can't know whether a woman is pregnant before 3 months. So it brings up the question of abortion. I was wondering if the great masters talk about these first 3 months. If I understood, reincarnation occurs at the moment of conception. Is there any explanation concerning these first 3 months? If you want a good deal of detail about the way it occurs, in the Precious Ornament of Liberation, there's a lot of detail about the development of the fetus. You won't find a lot of detail here, but I don't think this lapse of time, 3 months in particular, is mentioned. But in any case, the component of birth begins at conception and continues up through the point when the baby comes out of the mother's belly. Mind is present from the moment of conception. Whether an abortion occurs before the first 3 months or after the first 3 months, Buddhist thought explains that the mind is present from the moment of conception. And there will be suffering associated with that because the fetus has a mind. I haven't seen any special mention of this duration of 3 months. It's 4:33. One last question, perhaps? You mentioned existences of desire, form, and formless. That's not clear to me. I don't know what this is. That's kind of a whole subject, but just quickly, the desire realm is the realm where we live. There are various classes of beings, including human beings. The primary characteristics, as it was said at one point, is constant seeking of desirable objects. Desire is very strongly present in this realm, notably for outer objects. The form realm doesn't involve this seeking for agreeable outer objects. Beings are absorbed in meditative concentration. They're in a state of calm. They have attachment, as was said, for this meditative concentration. They're in a state of peace. They feel good. They're not looking for outer objects. And then the formless realm is similar. They're states of meditative concentration, but there is no longer any outer form. Even beings don't have a body, more or less. There are debates. But in general, well, we can say that in the form realm there are still forms, but in the formless realm there are no forms. Beings are simply in meditative concentration without outer forms or a form of a body. We'll conclude here.
Merci, à demain.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.